Hi there, this is Dr. Robert Cywes, the Carbaddictiondoc, back with another episode in the mini-series Diabetes. This episode is called Understanding and Treating Type 2 Diabetes to Remission. I don't like the word cure because it can come back if you stop doing what you need to do. But remission is possible and remission is highly recommended, where you have normal blood indices and have no disease. If you'd like to be treated as a single patient or as a group of patients, if you have an interest in working more with me, please text me to 561-517-0642 to set up an appointment. We can do it virtually, telephonically, or on Skype, or we can do it in person in my office in Florida. So let's look at type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is actually very, very simple to understand. When you eat sugar and starch, and as you've probably heard before, it doesn't matter how the sugar and starch goes in your face. As you eat sugar and starch, your blood sugar elevates, and your pancreas is then asked to do a job it wasn't primarily designed to do. Your pancreas is asked to produce a hormone called insulin, not to control the production of sugar by your liver, but now to force the liver to convert sugar into fat. And as long as the liver can very rapidly remove sugar from your bloodstream and turn it into fat, you may gain weight, which is the cause of obesity. But as long as the liver can empty that bloodstream, you don't become diabetic. However, what happens to the systems in the liver is they become less and less sensitive to insulin. And over time, they become resistant to insulin. And at first, your pancreas can produce more insulin to force the liver to do its job. But eventually it gets to a point where you cannot produce more insulin and the liver's resistance to that insulin is greater than the insulin you can produce. And what happens then is slowly over time, that sugar builds up in the bloodstream. And at that point, your body starts getting damaged. Your vascular system and every organ that gets provided with blood gets damaged by chronic excessive blood sugar. And it doesn't have to be very high. 100, 110 is enough to cause that damage. Remember, your blood sugar should be around 70 to 80 for the most part as a resting blood sugar. But as you put those carbohydrates in your mouth, as they enter the bloodstream, as your blood sugar builds up and your liver can't keep up with the removal, that blood sugar builds up and it starts to damage your blood system. So now you reach a peak of insulin. So you've got hyperinsulinemia, huge production of insulin, and even that huge production of insulin can't keep pace with the amount of sugar you're putting in. And slowly over time, as that blood sugar builds up, it starts to damage the blood vessels and also the blood cells, especially the red blood cells. And when sugar attaches to the hemoglobin in those red blood cells, it glycosylates them. And we measure that with a test called your hemoglobin A1C. It's a percentage of your red blood cells that's damaged. And as your hemoglobin A1C goes up, the traditional mechanism or the traditional diagnosis is insulin resistance or prediabetes. And once the percentage of affected red blood cells hits 6.5, you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That is the traditional way of doing it. But here's the key thing that you've got to understand. Normal A1C is about 4.8 to 5.2. And anything above that is the first measure of damage to your body. So even if your A1C is 5.5 or 5.7 or 6, you may not be diagnosed with diabetes, but your body is still incurring the damage of that diabetogenic effect. And that's the problem. So hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance to that elevated level of insulin is the most important thing. We don't really have a name for that yet, but I call that diabetes. I don't call diabetes a 6.5 number. When I talk to my patients, that's diabetes because diabetes is the damage that's happening. It isn't a number. The reason why they, the outside world, call it 6.5 is that's when they believe you can start treating people. You want to start treating them even lower. So it's very simple to understand. Irrespective of what your A1C is, whether you're diabetic or not, the damage is happening, and the damage is happening exclusively based upon what you put in your face. When you put chronic excessive amounts of sugar and starch in your face on a regular basis, over time, that sugar damages the blood vessels and the organs that the blood vessels supply. That is diabetes. Forget about medical treatment. Most of my diabetic patients or pre-diabetic patients come in on a slew of medications. The most important thing to understand is that it's your relationship with carbohydrates that causes harm. The second important thing to understand is the human body functions independent of the consumption of carbohydrates. Nobody has to drink alcohol. Nobody has to drink carbohydrates. Yes, they have a wonderful drug-like effect to make us feel happy and relaxed, just like alcohol. But if you're suffering damage from alcohol or from diabetes, quit the sugar, quit the alcohol. So the principles in our practice is to help you to treat the cause of the problem, which is chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption for the management, the dysfunctional management of your emotions. More about that in other episodes. Once you understand that and you begin to eliminate carbohydrates from your diet, you cannot have type 2 diabetes. You cannot have type 2 diabetes if you do not eat carbohydrates. And the diabetes gets better very, very quickly if you're early on in the progression of the disease. If you've been a type 2 diabetic for 30 years, you may actually have damaged some of those cells in the pancreas, although that's a theory, not necessarily proven. So it may be slower before you get better. But everybody with a true diagnosis of type 2 diabetes can put their disease into remission. No damage with normal A1Cs and normal blood sugar indices if they don't eat carbohydrates. And that's the principle of the ketogenic diet treatment for diabetes. Get rid of the sugar, eat fat so that you're burning fat as a fuel source, not sugar, and you're not converting protein to sugar, maybe just a little bit to provide that baseline sugar, but you're living off fat. If you are fat adapted, you cannot be type 2 diabetic. And what happens is, as the tissues in your body, it takes about 3 months, about 60 to 90 days, for the tissues in your body to become comfortable for the biologic systems that use ketones or use fat to ramp up, and the ones that use sugar in cells that can use either to go down. So you can get into ketosis where you're burning fat in 2 or 3 days, but it takes 60 to 90 days to fat adapt, where your tissues preferentially use ketones. And really what's happening in the background, because you're learning to live off fat more and more, ketone bodies, fat you're eating and your own fat, your insulin resistance goes down. And the cells become more and more sensitive to insulin. So you need less insulin and you need less blood sugar for the body to survive intact. And if you can reduce your production of sugar to basal levels by the liver, enough to keep you alive, maybe 4 or 5 grams of sugar at any one time, and you're insulin sensitive, that insulin is now controlling glucagon rather than controlling your blood sugar. Once you reach a state of insulin sensitivity, all that damage from diabetes goes away. So you reduce the harm, you reduce the inflammation, you reduce the cancer risk, you reduce the damage to every organ in your body if you come off those carbohydrates. But you've got to sustain it. You go back to those carbohydrates, you destroy everything. That's why we use the word remission, not cure. No carbohydrates, no type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is where your liver no longer responds to the maximum amount of insulin your body can produce. And insulin resistance and prediabetes is somewhere just below that, but the damage is still happening. It's very simple to understand. No carbohydrate consumption, no type 2 diabetes. And if only endocrinologists could understand that simple thing. Yes, we have to help our patients to understand why they consume the carbohydrates, the emotional management side, the drug addiction side. That's why I'm the Carbaddictiondoc. But ultimately, no matter how addicted you are, your survival depends on your divorce from your best friend, sugar and starch, carbohydrates. And if you do that, you cannot be diabetic and you cannot be obese. It takes time to recover, but recovery is absolutely possible. The challenge for me as a doctor is I don't have a pill. I don't have an operation. I don't have something I could do to you. All I can give you is information, motivation, encouragement, addiction management. But ultimately, you caused your type 2 diabetes. You can make it go into remission and keep it there by getting into a ketogenic lifestyle and letting go of carbohydrates. And then the final key point is this. All diets have some allowance. When it comes to addiction, there is no allowance. So the goal every day for carbohydrate consumption is as close to zero as you can get. as close to zero as you can get. Anytime you eat carbohydrates, that's not a cheat day. That's not allowance. That's a relapse. And that relapse is measurable in your bloodstream. So type 2 diabetes is very simple. No carbohydrates, no type 2 diabetes, no damage. There's no magic to that. And I will take on anybody that wants to argue with me about that. You bring your science and your facts and your data, I'll bring mine. Tim Noakes did this in South Africa. He won twice. And Tim Noakes, his father died of type 2 diabetes. He himself, despite being a 70-time marathon completer, was a type 2 diabetic because of carb loading. When he got rid of the carbohydrates completely, his diabetes went into remission. So we have this massive pile of science and evidence. The guys that treat, or the people that treat diabetes with medications, have zero evidence. Zero evidence because they never, ever get people into remission. We do it every day. If you're interested to learn more, if you want my help or our program's help, please text me to 561-517-0642. We can set up a virtual consultation online or telephonically, or we can do it in person in my offices in Jacksonville or in West Palm Beach. Treat your diabetes to remission and keep it there. Good luck.